I woke up alone. That wasn't how it was supposed to be. The sheets were cool beside me, untouched by warmth, as if no one had been there at all. My hand drifted to the space where he should have been, fingers brushing the smooth linen. It felt wrong. He was always a restless sleeper, shifting, tangling himself in the blankets, always reaching for me in the middle of the night. But the bed was perfectly made on his side, the pillow untouched, as if I had gone to sleep alone. But I hadn't. The first spark of unease flickered in my chest. I sat up, pushing back the covers, my pulse thrumming unevenly. The hotel suite was bathed in the soft glow of early morning light. The curtains parted just enough to let in the gray dawn. The ocean stretched beyond the balcony, waves rolling endlessly, a view meant to be shared. I turned to the nightstand, expecting to see his phone charging, his wallet, the watch he always took off before bed. They were all there. I reached for the wedding band, the simple gold band he had slipped onto his finger just yesterday. It was cold. My stomach twisted as I turned it over in my palm. He never went anywhere without it. Never even took it off in the shower. The hotel room felt suddenly vast, too empty, like a stage after the actors had left. I stood, the floor cool beneath my feet as I stepped in the bathroom. No running water. No steam clinging to the mirror. The towels were untouched, perfectly folded. The suit he had worn to dinner last night was still draped over the chair, the shoes neatly aligned below it. I called his name. The sound died in the space between the walls. I checked my phone, scrolling through messages. Nothing from him. Nothing at all. A whole thread of conversations we'd shared over the last week. Our last messages full of exclamation marks and giddy excitement. Can't believe we're finally here. Love you so much. Then silence. I told myself he had gone downstairs for coffee. Maybe a morning walk on the beach. But he would have woken me. He knew I panicked when I woke up alone in strange places. The knot in my stomach tightened. I left the room, stepping into the hushed hallway, my bare feet whispering against the carpet as I hurried to the elevator. The hotel lobby was still quiet, only a few early risers sipping coffee at the lounge. The receptionist smiled as I approached, polite but detached. I forced a breath and asked if she had seen my husband. She tilted her head, her smile slipping slightly. Then came the words that made the world tilt around me. She said I had checked in alone. The words didn't make sense at first. I laughed, a thin, fragile sound, insisting she had to be mistaken. We had arrived together, hand in hand. We had taken pictures in front of the grand chandelier, his arms around my waist, his lips pressed to my temple. He had signed the check-in papers while I admired the ocean view from the lobby. But there was no record of him, no name in the system, no extra key card issued. Just me. I left the desk, stomach churning, head light with confusion. The staff was wrong. They had to be. He was here. Somewhere. He was here. I searched the restaurant, the poolside bar, the beach. I walked through the gardens, calling his name under my breath, hoping he would appear from behind the palms with that lopsided grin, teasing me for worrying. I checked the gym, the spa, the gift shop, but every face I passed was unfamiliar. No one had seen him. No one remembered him. By the time I returned to the room, my hands were trembling. The wedding album was sitting on the dresser. I didn't remember putting it there. My breath came short and shallow as I reached for it, flipping open the heavy cover, the scent of new pages filling my nose. The first image was the church, rows of pews filled with familiar faces, my friends, my family. The next page, me standing at the altar, my dress a perfect cascade of white. Then the next, the bridesmaids, the groomsmen, my mother wiping a tear from her cheek. And then, nothing. Every picture that should have held him was empty. The space where he stood was blank, a hollow absence that made my pulse hammer against my ribs. The first dance, just me, arms poised as if wrapped around an invisible partner. The cake cutting, my hands alone, holding the knife where it should have been. My fingers fumbled as I turned the pages faster, breath hitching. There was no groom, not a single trace of him. A sob rose in my throat, thick and burning, but I swallowed it down, forcing myself to keep going. I reached the last page, my hands shaking so hard, I almost dropped the book. The final image was nothing but a blank space. And beneath it, scrawled in ink, was a note. It was written in my own handwriting. You promised. The book slipped from my hands, landing with a dull thud against the carpet. A gust of wind rattled the balcony door, though it was shut. Somewhere in the empty room, I swore I heard a whisper. "You promised." The police arrived quickly, though their expressions suggested they weren't taking me seriously. I paced as they searched the room, as they checked the bed, the closet, the bathroom. I showed them his phone, his wallet, the wedding band sitting on the nightstand. Evidence, proof that he had been here, that he was real, but they didn't seem convinced. They asked routine questions, when I had last seen him, what he was wearing, if we had argued, but something about the way they looked at me felt off. One officer excused himself to check the hotel's records. Another requested security footage. I clung to that, believing that soon, any second now, they would return with answers. They would see him walking beside me. They would confirm that we checked in together just yesterday, hand in hand. But when they came back, their faces were unreadable. There was no evidence of him. The hotel had no record of a second guest, no check-in under his name. The CCTV footage showed only me stepping out of the taxi, rolling my suitcase into the lobby alone. My breath caught as I watched the grainy footage, my own face blank with exhaustion, moving as I remembered, but without him. There was no one at my side. The images warped in my mind. That wasn't right. That wasn't how it had happened. The officers exchanged glances, their sympathy laced with skepticism. I gritted my teeth, feeling something cold creep along my spine. I told them they were wrong, that there had to be a mistake, but the evidence, the utter lack of it, sank into my skin like ice water. I demanded that they call my family. My mother had been at the wedding. My friends had taken pictures. They would tell them the truth. So they did, and one by one, their voices filled the silence. None of them remember wedding. None of them remembered him. My mother's voice, tinny and distant, said she didn't know what I was talking about. My friends insisted I had always been single. My coworkers, my old college roommates, they all said the same thing. I had never been engaged, never been married, never even had a fiancé. It didn't make sense. I tore through my things when I got back to the room. I yanked open my suitcase, flung aside my clothes, searching for something, anything to prove them wrong. The invitation cards I had meticulously chosen, the wedding dress receipt, the itinerary for our honeymoon. Gone. I checked my phone. Our texts. Our photos. Our calls. Nothing. The album in the hotel room had been altered, but surely my phone would have pictures. Proof. The nights we spent together, the life we built, the thousands of memories we had captured. My heart pounded as I scrolled through my gallery. Image after image, I stared at the emptiness. Wedding photos where I stood alone. Dinner tables set for two, but occupied only by me. My arms wrapped around nothing but air. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles ached. I knew he had been there. I knew he had existed, but the world no longer agreed. When I returned home, I felt the weight of something unseen pressing against my chest. I moved like a ghost through the space we had shared. Our house, now only mine. Every document listed as single owner. My closet held only my clothes. My bathroom cabinet was empty of his razors, his cologne, the small traces of his existence. I searched the drawers. Our marriage certificate, the paperwork we had signed together, promising forever. Nothing. A crushing silence filled the house, thick and suffocating. No sound of his footsteps, no familiar rustle of fabric as he moved through the rooms. No scent of him lingering in the air. I checked my social media, scrolling through years of posts, expecting to find our anniversary dinners, our vacations, the day he proposed. But it was all different now. The pictures were there, but the details had changed. Every caption had been rewritten, every memory altered. The people who had stood beside me at the altar had rewritten history. My history. I wasn't married. I had never been married. I stayed up late, retracing my steps, trying to remember when reality had shifted. Had it been yesterday? Last week? Had I simply woken up in a different version of my own life? Or had something taken him away? The shadows stretched long against the walls as exhaustion took its toll. My thoughts spiraled in an endless loop, tried to untangle the impossible. I curled into bed, wrapping myself in the covers, trying to ground myself in something real. The room felt too large, the bed too empty. As sleep crept closer, I felt it again, that icy sliver of unease pressing into my ribs. A whisper, soft, breathy, just above my ear. You promised. There had to be an explanation. Somewhere, buried beneath the fog of confusion. There had to be a reason why my life had unraveled into something unrecognizable. Memory loss. Trauma. A break in my mind that had erased him, twisting my perception of reality. It was the only answer that made sense. I sought out a therapist, my fingers trembling as I filled out paperwork in a sterile waiting room. The walls were painted in soft pastels, meant to be calming, but they only made me feel more untethered, like I was floating in a world not built for me. When I spoke, I expected skepticism. Instead, she listened, watching me with quiet concern as I explained everything. The missing husband, the altered records, the void where my marriage had once been. Dissociative amnesia, she suggested. A trauma response. Perhaps something had happened to him, something too painful for my mind to accept. It had rewritten my memories, distorted the truth to protect me. I wanted to believe her, but there was no grief inside me, only fear. She offered hypnosis, a way to dig into the gaps, to pull out what my conscious mind refused to acknowledge. I agreed, despite the gnawing hesitation in my stomach. I needed to know. As she guided me into relaxation, my body grew heavy, my breathing slowing. Her voice was distant, barely there, as she urged me to remember. Flashes of my wedding day surfaced. The weight of the ring on my finger, his fingers lacing through mine. The scent of fresh flowers, of candle wax burning in the reception hall. The soft murmur of vows whispered against my skin. His voice, but his face, blurred, as if smeared away by unseen hands. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't bring it into focus. The details of his suit, his posture, even the warmth of his touch, all there. But where his features should have been, there was nothing but static. The therapist's voice wavered, pulling me from the haze. When I opened my eyes, she was staring at me, pale and rigid. Something didn't want me to remember. I stumbled out of the office, nausea curling in my gut, my head pounding with half-formed memories. The world outside felt unreal, the streets unfamiliar despite having walked them 100 times before. By the time I reached home, the dread had settled deep into my bones. I turned on the lights, needing the brightness to chase away the shadows. My hands were clammy as I reached for the bathroom sink, splashing cold water on my face, trying to steady my breathing. And then I saw it. A ring, my wedding band, sitting in the porcelain basin, smeared with something dark. The substance clung to the metal, thick and congealed, trailing in streaks toward the drain. My stomach clenched as I wiped at it with shaking fingers. It wasn't rust. It wasn't dirt. It was something far worse. The house felt wrong around me. The air too thick, too still. My pulse pounded in my ears as I stepped into the bedroom, a space that should have been mine, but now felt foreign. The walls, scratched, deep gouges raked across the surface, like fingernails dragging against plaster. Lines carved in frantic desperation, marking a struggle, a plea. A whisper of movement behind me sent my nerves into overdrive. I spun, but there was nothing. Just the empty room, the unnatural quiet pressing against my skull. I was losing my mind. I climbed into bed, exhausted and shaking, curling beneath the covers as if they could protect me. The darkness stretched too wide, the silence too deep. Every sound felt amplified. The creak of the house settling, the whisper of the wind outside. And then, a pressure against my chest. Not a dream, not sleep paralysis. Something unseen pressed down on me, pinning me in place. My lungs seized, my limbs frozen. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My heartbeat thundered in my skull as the weight bore down, suffocating, heavy with something I didn't understand. A voice impossibly close, right against my ear. You promised you wouldn't forget me. I could no longer trust my memories. They unraveled at the seams. Each day, another thread pulling loose, another certainty slipping through my fingers. But if the world insisted my husband had never existed, I needed proof that he had. That somewhere, in some version of reality, we had stood together, hand in hand, ready to begin our lives. The wedding venue was the only place left to turn. The drive there felt endless, the road stretching impossibly long, as if time itself resisted my journey. The trees blurred past in the late afternoon light, casting elongated shadows that reached toward my car like grasping hands. When I arrived, the grand hall stood as I remembered it. Ivory walls, high windows that bathed the room in golden light, rows of chairs neatly arranged before an altar that had once held the promise of forever. But the staff didn't recognize me. I pressed forward, describing the wedding, the details I remembered so vividly. The chandeliers, the white roses, the way my voice had trembled when I spoke my vows. Their faces remained blank, apologetic. They had no record of my wedding, no recollection of my name. But then, a flicker of something. One of them hesitated. A brief exchange of glances. A reluctant suggestion to speak with the officiant. I found him in his office, a small room lined with old books and framed photographs of smiling couples. His eyes met mine, and something shifted in his expression. Not confusion, not curiosity, recognition. And beneath that, horror. His hands trembled as he reached for a ledger, an old, dust-covered book with frayed edges. He flipped through the pages with slow, deliberate movements, as if already knowing what he would find but dreading the confirmation. My name was there, the date of the ceremony, the list of guests, and then, where my husband's name should have been, one word, written in my own handwriting, erased. A chill crawled up my spine, settling into the marrow of my bones. My own writing, but I had no memory of ever holding the pen. The officiant refused to meet my eyes. His breathing was shallow, his fingers tightening around the edge of the desk, as if bracing himself against something unseen. The wedding had not happened. He never should have come back. I stumbled from the room, my pulse a violent drumbeat in my ears. The air inside the venue pressed against me, too thick, too heavy. It wasn't just that no one remembered. Something had been undone, removed. I drove aimlessly, the world outside blurred, lost in the weight of unraveling reality. My mind clung to what it knew, the certainty of love, of shared laughter, of whispered promises in the dark. But now every memory felt fragile, warped by something I couldn't name. The answers had to be somewhere. At home, I scoured old records, digging through anything that might hold a trace of truth. I searched newspaper archives, desperate to find our announcement, something to prove that I had not imagined the life I had lived. And then, buried in the pages of forgotten news, I found it. A story, a bride left alone at the altar. The grainy photograph showed my face, pale and lost, the veil draped over my shoulders like a shroud. The article recounted the tragic accident, the groom's car skidding off the road the night before the ceremony, his body pulled from the wreckage before sunrise. 5 years ago. But that was impossible. I had just married him, hadn't I? The room seemed to tilt, shadows stretching impossibly long across the walls. The newspaper trembled in my hands, the ink smudging beneath my fingertips. Somewhere in the distance, a whisper threaded through the silence. You promised. The truth crashes into me like shattered glass. I remember everything. The rain had been relentless that night, pounding against the windshield as we drove, laughter filling the car, our hands entwined over the center console. We had been talking about the future, our house, the children we might have, the life that stretched before us like an unwritten story. Then headlights, the screech of tires, the deafening sound of impact. I remember crawling to him, my fingers slipping against wet pavement, his body twisted in a way that bodies shouldn't be. Blood pooling beneath his head, soaking into the cracks of the road. I remember screaming, begging, not just to the paramedics who arrived too late, not just to the strangers who stood helplessly in the rain. I had begged something else, something that had been listening. Bring him back. The words had been torn from my throat, raw and desperate. And someone had answered, but the thing that returned wasn't him. The memories I lost weren't stolen. I had given them up. A trade, an exchange, A vow. I drive home, the past unraveling in my mind like a frayed thread, each piece falling into place. The road twists beneath my tires, the night darker than it should be, as if the world itself recoils for what I've remembered. By the time I reach my house, my breath is shallow, my hands shaking as I grip the steering wheel. The lights are off, but the air around the house is wrong, thick with something unseen. Inside, the temperature has dropped. Frost clings to the edges of the windows, spreading in intricate patterns across the glass. My breath fogs as I step forward, the air thick with something old, something waiting. The bedroom mirror is covered in ice. I stare at my own reflection, but something is wrong. It moves seconds after I do, the delay slight but unmistakable. A whisper slides through the silence, curling around me like smoke. The voice is no longer distant, no longer a murmur in the dark. It growls. You promised. A shadow moves in the corner of the room, stretching impossibly long against the walls. I turn, and he is there. Or at least, something is. It wears his form, his height, his silhouette. But its eyes are hollow, black pits where warmth once existed. Its limbs are too stiff, its movements slightly disjointed, like a marionette held by invisible strings. It steps forward, and the walls groan with the pressure of something unseen. You vow to love me forever, even in death. The words vibrate through my skull, pressing against the edges of my mind. The mirror fogs, frost creeping outward in jagged lines. My reflection no longer mimics me. It watches. Then my own voice drifts from the glass. And now you belong to me. The last thing I see before darkness consumes me is my own reflection reaching through the glass, dragging me in,